course, Judy Garland and Leopold Stokowski and Jan Pierce and Eddie Fisher, when Debbie lets them out of the house, entertain for many people. Of course, they entertain one at a time, not all at once.
You know, the Hollywood Bowl, I always say, is probably the most diverse set of musical offerings of any major music festival in the world. If you go all the way back to the very beginning, the Hollywood Bowl was really a very natural site nestled into a canyon where a group of people realized quite by chance that there was a great natural acoustic. And they decided that we should use this space, and this was not at a very developed time in Los Angeles history, so this is very much on the outside of what is now Hollywood. The bowl was situated just at the top of Highland Avenue, and in many ways it's situated as the gateway to Hollywood. As you're coming in off the pass, you come across the bowl first before you get down into what we now think of as Hollywood, with the Chinese Theater and the Roosevelt Hotel and all the other great landmarks of Hollywood. And I think when you drive by and you see the beautiful iconic statue, you know that this is a town for artists and musicians and actors, and it's a place for culture. And they did plays, they did Easter sunrise services, they had rallies, they had community meetings, they had a production of Twelfth Night, occasional events that took advantage of this very natural, acoustically wonderful bucolic canyon. There was no shell, there wasn't even permanent seating, it was just kind of an open space. But a group of those people got together and realized that there was something here that could really be made something permanent, something that would be a gift to the people of Los Angeles. And there was a woman who we really think of as the mother of the bowl, who was part of this group of civic leaders and philanthropists who cared so much about the bowl, and her name was Artie Mason Carter. And she asked the director of the LA Philharmonic at the time, the founder of the LA Philharmonic, if he would bring the orchestra to perform for an Easter sunrise service, which he did in 1921, and that was the first time the Philharmonic performed on that spot. In 1922, the Philharmonic started an annual summer series of concerts, and it's been the home of the Philharmonic ever since that time. The first couple of years of the bowl, when it was very much used sporadically, there wasn't any shell. There was a platform, a wooden platform, and a stage. The shell was brought in, I think, particularly when the orchestra was having a regular appearance at the bowl to help with the acoustics for the musicians on stage. But really, in the beginning years, the shells were always intended to be temporary. What people might not realize is that they were very purposely designed to last for one season, so that way you'd have a different look every year, and they were considered to be temporary structures. So the first few changed in shape. We had an elliptical shape. There was a very famous pyramid shape that Lloyd Wright had designed, eventually settling on a streamlined modern style, which is the concentric rings that Allied architects built. And the early shells, from what I understand, had pros and cons. Some of them worked better than others. Some of them helped the acoustics on stage, and some of them perhaps didn't do quite as well. But because they weren't intended to be permanent, it didn't really matter, so to speak.
You know, the shell was designed to project the sound out, just that shell. But although there's 18,000 seats, so that's a lot of projection for that shell.
I mean, the shape of the bowl is like a big speaker, right?
Yeah.
If you're up in the back, I think you can hear it pretty damn good.
You ever been up there?
Yeah. I saw Miles Davis there. I saw the Stones there.
You did?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
The Stones?
Yeah.
Yeah?
You know, the bowl used to have a reflecting pool right in front of the stage, which had fountains that shot out of it, and they would use it in the intermission, time to music and to light. It was a very iconic component of the bowl's architecture for many, many decades.
They had dancing waters with lights in between the acts, and it was basically to provide a screen in between acts so that people go on stage and change the sound. And it was very pretty, and it was very nice. And it actually, the sound in the bowl was better than, at least to my take, because the water took the sound off the stage and reflected it up and out. And it was very pretty.
When we played there still was the big reflection pool in front of the shell. And so they covered that and put a fake lawn on there. So really we were in front of the shell, and we knew water was beneath us, which was kind of unnerving with all that electronic equipment.
Had Jim really been out of it that night, I mean, he was on acid that night, but had he fallen off stage, he would have fallen into the water. which would have been interesting.
The bowl was primarily used for the Philharmonic Orchestra for many, many, many years. There was a jazz series fairly early at the bowl. In the 30s and 40s, you had people like Benny Goodman, Duke Ellington, and others who had made regular appearances at the bowl.
See Count Basie, innumerable artists, jazz artists.
What happens is, the interesting change in the tenor is when orchestral music started to be influenced by non-orchestral or pop or jazz influences, and I think that's when people started to really take notice about changes in the air. I think the most famous example of that is when Frank Sinatra performed with the LA Philharmonic for the first time in the early 40s at the Bowl. And if you go back and read the LA Times from the week prior and the week after that concert, just article after article every day about, is it okay for Frank Sinatra to perform with our great orchestra? Because orchestras at that time didn't perform with people like Frank Sinatra. A young jazz singer or pop singer couldn't be the soloist in front of a symphony orchestra. As the 60s came in and you started to see more pop and rock influence generally in the culture, I'd say probably the late 50s is when Dick Clark started his rock and roll reviews of the Hollywood Bowl. So 1958 was the first time Dick Clark put together a rock and roll review for us, and Duane Eddy was the first rock performer to ever grace the stage of the Hollywood Bowl, playing his guitar, of course. Since then, then things kind of unfolded very quickly. If you look back at the ledgers from the early 60s, it's all of the great bands that you would imagine from that period. Any of the icons that you can think of, people like Johnny Cash, Ray Charles, the Beach Boys, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, Jimi Hendrix, the Grateful Dead, the Byrds, and the Kinks.
All my contemporaries played there, Hendrix and the Dead and the Beach Boys, and I was jealous. But I was in awe. I wanted to be up there. And I was.
I think what's really special about going to concerts at the Bowl, and particularly the rock concerts, is there's so much energy when you're in that very isolated canyon. You're surrounded by the city, but at that moment it's just you and the performer, because there's nothing else to distract you. People know that there's so much history that's running through that whole canyon. So I know that when, performers tell me that when they play the Bowl, it feels different to them than any other venue they've played, because they know who else has stood on that stage, and they know that they're part of a tradition that's gone back 91 years, almost unchanged. These iconic moments in music history have taken place on that very same spot. It feels, it's almost a cliche, but it feels like hallowed ground for a lot of performers, and I think the audiences feel that too.
I think to the Doors or any artist playing the Hollywood Bowl is kind of a goal.
Well, the Hollywood Bowl was always this incredible, iconic venue, and to think that I would play there was like, whoa,
How do you get to the Hollywood Bowl? You get to the Hollywood Bowl by limo, of course, but for us to get there, then we had to get a #1 record, and then we had to play a bunch of places, and then we played Madison Square Garden, and up and down the coast, and started to play all over the country.
The first gig we ever played was at the Hughes Aircraft, where Ray's mom worked. We got the gig, I think it was for either Christmas or Thanksgiving kind of party they had. That we had to play like jazz standards and stuff like that. And Jim we'd never actually done a gig before. Somehow we got through the gig. It was actually fun.
Back then, not a lot of people had this going on, and so they just stared at us like we were from Mars, And no screaming. It wasn't Doors mania. It was like, whoa, who are these aliens? Although they're interesting. That lead singer, boy, black leather, whoa.
And they go play high schools, little gigs, private parties, get $20 and split it 4 ways.
The Valley Teen Center was in the round. That was weird. We go down to the stage, we get on it, and then they start up the motor, and it starts to slowly turn as we play. I mean, that's, already playing music that's kind of psychedelic. And so when you finish, the stage doesn't necessarily stop at the aisle you came down.